Jane Smith stood at the registration desk of the prestigious Newtown 3-day event, her entry form clutched in one hand and her checkbook in the other. Behind her, tied to her rusty trailer, was Muffin, a 15-hand paint horse with more patches than a quilt, and a disposition so calm he'd probably sleep through an earthquake. The registration coordinator, a woman named Fiona Kent, who wore her pearls like armor, looked up from her computer screen. Her expression went from professional courtesy to barely concealed horror in approximately 3 seconds. "I'm sorry," Fiona said, though her tone suggested she wasn't sorry at all. "Which division are you entering?" "Advanced level," Jane replied, sliding her entry form across the desk. Fiona's perfectly manicured eyebrows rose so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. "Advanced, as in the top level of eventing?" "That's the one." "And your horse is?" Fiona leaned to peer out the window at the parking area, her eyes scanning past the gleaming European warm bloods in their custom trailers until they landed on Muffin. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "That paint horse. His name is Muffin. I see." Fiona picked up Jane's entry form like it might contaminate her. "Miss Smith, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. The advanced division at Newtown is reserved for serious competitors, horses of a certain caliber." Jane felt her jaw tighten. "Muffin is qualified. We've completed 4 advanced level events this season. Our scores are all in the entry packet." "Yes, I see that." Fiona barely glanced at the paperwork. "But Newtown isn't just any event. We have standards to maintain. Sponsors, spectators, media coverage. Every horse that competes here represents the prestige of this competition. And you're saying my horse doesn't meet those standards. I'm saying that 3-day eventing, particularly at this level, requires a certain type of horse. Warm bloods, thoroughbreds, horses bred specifically for the discipline. Not." She gestured vaguely toward the window. "Western pleasure horses. Muffin isn't a Western pleasure horse, he's an eventer. A good one." Fiona sighed, the kind of sigh that suggested she was being very patient with someone very stupid. "Miss Smith, I'm trying to save you embarrassment. Look at the other competitors." She gestured toward the stable area where a dozen magnificent horses stood in cross ties, their coats gleaming, their breeding evident in every line. "These are $50,000, $100,000, even $200,000 horses. They're trained by Olympic coaches, ridden by professional competitors. And then there's your Muffin." She said his name like it hurt. "My entry fees are the same as everyone else's," Jane said quietly. "My qualifications are in order. I have every right to compete here." "Technically, yes," Fiona set down the entry form. "But I'm asking you as someone who cares about this sport to reconsider. Newtown has a reputation. When people see a paint horse in the advanced division, it reflects poorly on all of us. It looks unprofessional." Behind them, someone cleared their throat. Jane turned to see 3 other competitors waiting in line, all of them clearly listening to every word. One of them, a young woman in expensive breeches and custom boots, was trying not to smile. "I'm not withdrawing my entry," Jane said, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. Fiona's expression hardened. "Then I'm afraid I'll need to speak with the technical delegate. There are safety concerns when horses aren't properly prepared for this level of competition." "Safety concerns." Muffin has completed every event this season without a single refusal or penalty in the cross-country phase. Nevertheless, Fiona stood. "Please wait here." As she walked away, Jane heard the whispers starting behind her. She didn't turn around. She knew what they were seeing. A woman in her 30s, with calloused hands and off-brand breeches, boots that had been resold twice, and a horse that looked like he belonged at a county fair, not a prestigious 3-day event. 20 minutes later, Fiona returned with a man in his 60s wearing an official's badge. Richard Thornberry, the technical delegate, had the kind of face that suggested he'd seen everything in his 40 years of eventing, and wasn't impressed by much, Miss Smith, he said, his tone professional, but cool. I understand there's some concern about your entry. My horse is qualified, Jane said before he could continue. We've met every requirement for advanced level competition. Our record is clean. Our vet checks are current. There's no legitimate reason to refuse our entry. Thornberry studied her for a long moment. May I see your horse? They walked out to the trailer where Muffin stood dozing in the late afternoon sun. He was a stocky paint horse with irregular patches of brown and white that formed no particular pattern. His mane was thick and slightly unruly despite Jane's best efforts. His legs were short and sturdy, his build more compact than the leggy thoroughbreds and warm bloods that dominated the sport. He looked, Jane had to admit, completely out of place. Thornberry circled Muffin slowly, saying nothing. The horse opened one eye, assessed the stranger, and went back to dozing. Finally, Thornberry spoke. He's not what we typically see at this level. No, Jane agreed. He's not his breeding paint horse. His dam was a ranch horse. His sire was used for team penning. I bought him from a Western trainer in Montana 4 years ago for $1,200. Thornberry's eyebrows rose. And you've brought him to advanced level eventing. Yes, that's unusual. Yes. Thornberry pulled out his phone and tapped at it for a moment. Your scores from the qualifying events are legitimate. No major faults, actually. He paused, reading more carefully. These are quite good scores. How did you manage that with a horse like this? Jane felt something sharp in her chest. A horse like this meaning what exactly? To his credit, Thornberry had the grace to look uncomfortable. You know what I mean? He's not bred for this sport. He doesn't have the build, the movement, the look of an event horse. And yet, he is qualified for advanced level. Same as every other horse here. Thornberry was quiet for a long time. Finally, he sighed. Miss Smith, off the record, I'm going to be honest with you. Can you compete here? Technically, yes. Your paperwork is in order, but should you? That's a different question. Because of how he looks. Because Newtown draws significant media attention. Because sponsors invest a lot of money in this event. Because the image we present matters to the future of this sport. He gestured toward the grand stable complex where the other horses were being settled. Every horse that competes here is a representation of what eventing is about. Excellence, precision, breeding, training. I'm not saying your horse isn't capable. I'm saying he doesn't represent what this sport aspires to be. Jane looked at Muffin, who had dozed off again. One hip cocked, completely relaxed. 4 years ago, she'd driven 14 hours to Montana to look at this horse. The Western trainer had been honest with her. He's a good horse, but he's not fancy, not pretty. Not what people want anymore. Jane had ridden him anyway, and in 30 minutes, she'd known Muffin had heart. More heart than any horse she'd ever sat on. Mr. Thornberry, Jane said quietly. I understand your concerns, but I'm not withdrawing. Muffin and I have worked too hard to get here. We've earned this opportunity, and we're taking it. Thornberry studied her face, then nodded slowly. All right, your entry is accepted. But Miss Smith, I hope you're prepared for what's coming. This isn't going to be easy. He had no idea how right he was. Jane had competed at enough events to know the social hierarchy. At the lower levels, people were friendly, supportive, happy to help a fellow competitor. But advanced level eventing was different. This was the realm of professional riders, wealthy amateurs with unlimited resources, and horses that cost more than most people's houses. As she settled Muffin into his assigned stall, naturally the smallest one in the furthest barn, Jane felt the weight of every stare, every whispered comment, every barely concealed laugh. Is that a paint horse? Someone brought their trail horse to Newtown. This is embarrassing. Who let her enter? Jane kept her head down and focused on Muffin. She filled his water bucket, hung his haynet, checked his legs for any heat or swelling from the trailer ride. The horse, as always, was completely unbothered by the chaos around him. He munched his hay contentedly, occasionally swinging his head over the stall door to watch the activity in the barn aisle. "Excuse me?" Jane turned to find a young woman, early 20s, blonde, expensive, everything, standing at Muffin's stall with her phone out, clearly taking photos. "Can I help you?" Jane asked. "Oh my, this is hilarious. My friends aren't going to believe this." The woman tapped at her phone. "A paint horse at Newtown. This is going to get so many likes. Please don't photograph my horse. It's a public event," the woman smirked. "Besides, if you didn't want attention, you shouldn't have brought such a unique choice." She walked away, still tapping at her phone. Jane felt her stomach sink. Within an hour, Muffin's photo would be all over social media. The jokes would start. The mockery would spread. But that was just the beginning. The next morning, Jane arrived at the barn at 6 a.m. to find a small crowd gathered around Muffin's stall. Her heart jumped. Was something wrong with him? Then she saw what they were looking at. Someone had taped a handwritten sign to his stall door. "Pasture ornament, do not feed." The crowd dispersed when they saw her coming, most of them at least having the decency to look embarrassed. Jane tore down the sign with shaking hands. Muffin nickered at her, completely oblivious to the insult, just happy to see his person. "They're idiots," said a voice behind her. Jane turned to find an older woman, probably in her 60s, with kind eyes and clothes that suggested she was a working professional, not a wealthy amateur. "I'm Dr. Liz Rogers," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm here as a volunteer vet. I've been watching the social media storm about your horse." "Great," Jane said bitterly. "I looked up your scores. You two have a solid record. Consistent, clean rounds. That's more than most of these fancy horses can say." Dr. Rogers glanced at Muffin. "May I?" At Jane's nod, she entered the stall and began examining the horse with practiced hands. She checked his legs, his back, his feet, his teeth. Muffin stood patiently, occasionally turning his head to sniff at her pockets. "He's well cared for," Dr. Rogers said finally. "Good weight, solid muscle development, feet are excellent." "How old is he?" 10. "And you've been eventing him for 4 years." "Yes. Started him at training level, moved up gradually. He took to it like he'd been doing it his whole life." Dr. Rogers smiled. "You know what I think? I think these people are scared." "Scared of what?" "Of being shown up by a $12,100 paint horse. Because if you succeed, if Muffin proves he can compete at this level, it undermines everything they believe about breeding and money and what makes a proper event horse." She patted Muffin's neck. "Good luck tomorrow. I'll be rooting for you." The first day of the 3-day event was This was, Jane knew, going to be their weakest phase. Doctor required elegance, extension, floating movement that Muffin simply wasn't built for. His strides were shorter, his movement less flashy than the warm bloods who dominated this phase. But what he lacked in flash, he made up for in precision. Jane had spent hundreds of hours training Muffin's dress. Every transition was smooth. Every circle was geometrically perfect. Every movement was exactly where it should be, when it should be, how it should be. He might not look like a doctor horse, but he could sure as hell perform like one. When their time came, Jane rode Muffin into the doctor arena with her head high. The stands were surprisingly full. Apparently, word had spread about the paint horse. She could feel the skepticism radiating from the crowd. The judge rang the bell, signaling them to begin. For the next 6 minutes, Jane and Muffin danced. That was the only word for it. Muffin might not have had the massive ground-covering trot of a warm blood, but every step was placed with absolute precision. His transitions were seamless. His halts were square. His caner work was balanced and rhythmic. The crowd, which had started with scattered whispers, gradually went quiet. When they finished their final halt and salute, there was a moment of silence. Then, surprisingly scattered applause. Jane rode out of the arena with her heart pounding. She'd felt every movement, every transition, and she knew that was the best test Muffin had ever performed. The scores were posted an hour later. Jane pushed through the crowd around the scoreboard, her stomach in knots. Advanced Division, Dr. Faze, first place, Aristocrat. Score 28.5. Second place, Diamond Jubilee. Score 29.2. Third place Muffin score, 31.8. Third place. Out of 42 horses, Jane stared at the board. Not quite believing it. Muffin the paint horse, the pasture ornament, the embarrassment, was in third place, after Doc, at one of the most prestigious events in the country. That can't be right. Jane turned to see a tall man in his 40s, clearly a professional trainer based on his barn jacket, with multiple logos. He was staring at the scoreboard like it had personally offended him. The judge must have made a mistake, he continued to his companion. That paint horse cannot have scored higher than 16 other horses. The scoring is computerized. Someone else pointed out. No mistakes. Then the judge is incompetent. The trainer turned and walked away, his voice carrying. This is what happens when we let anyone enter these events. Standards are dropping. Jane stood very still, letting the anger wash through her and then past her. Let them talk. Let them complain. The scoreboard didn't lie. The second day of a 3-day event was cross-country, and it was Jane's favorite phase. This was where Muffin truly shined. This was where his ranch horse breeding, his natural athleticism, his absolute fearlessness came into play. The advanced level cross-country course at Newtown was notorious. 4 miles of terrain featuring 38 obstacles, including water complexes, drop fences, combinations, and jumps that would make lesser horses refuse. It required speed, courage, and most importantly, trust between horse and rider. Jane walked the course at dawn, studying every fence, every approach, every landing. The course was technical and demanding, but she'd walked harder courses with Muffin. They could do this. Planning your scratching strategy? Jane looked up to find Fiona from registration standing nearby with 2 other officials. Excuse me. The cross-country course. It's quite challenging. I thought you might be looking for a good place to retire. Fiona's smile didn't reach her eyes. No shame in it. Better to withdraw than to have a dangerous fall. We're not withdrawing, Miss Smith. I've been timing horses on this course all morning. The top competitors are riding thoroughbred crosses specifically bred for speed and stamina. Your paint horse is lovely, I'm sure, for trail riding or Western games, but this course is going to eat him alive. Jane looked Fiona directly in the eye. Guess we'll find out. By the time Jane's start time came around 2:47 p.m. Near the end of the day, the atmosphere was electric. Word had spread about the paint horse who'd placed 3rd in Doctor. The spectator areas along the cross-country course were packed. Social media was buzzing. People wanted to see what would happen. Most of them, Jane suspected, wanted to see her fail. She mounted Muffin in the start box, feeling his muscles coil beneath her. This was his element. This was what he was born to do. The starter began the countdown. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good luck. They exploded out of the start box. Muffin's stride was different from the leggy thoroughbreds. He was compact, powerful, eating up the ground with quick, efficient strides. The first fence came up fast, a solid table at 3.9 in. Muffin popped over it like it was nothing. The second fence, a brush jump, was equally effortless. By the time they reached the third fence, a tricky corner combination, Jane could hear the crowd beginning to react. She could feel Muffin's joy in every stride. This was what he loved. This was his purpose. The water complex at fence 15 was one of the most challenging obstacles on the course. Horses had to jump a log into water, take 3 strides through the water, then jump a massive log out while still in the water. It was the kind of fence that separated the brave horses from the rest. Muffin hit it at full speed. He launched over the first log with his ears pricked forward, landed in the water with a massive splash, powered through, and catapulted over the exit log like it had personally challenged him. The crowd roared. Jane barely heard them. She was focused on the course, on the rhythm, on the partnership between her and this incredible horse. Fence after fence disappeared behind them. The coffin at 18, the massive corner at 22, the terrifying drop fence at 29. Muffin never hesitated, never questioned, never backed down. As they approached the final fence, a solid oxer at the top of a hill, with the finish flags visible beyond, Jane realized they were going to make the optimum time. More than that, they were going to beat it. Muffin cleared the final fence and galloped through the finished flags. Jane pulled him up gradually, laughing with pure joy. They'd done it. Clear round, well under the time allowed. Dr. Rogers was waiting at the finish, ready to check Muffin's recovery. The horse was breathing hard, but happy, dancing in place, clearly wanting to go again. That, Dr. Rogers said, checking Muffin's heart rate, was one of the most impressive cross-country rounds I've seen all day. His heart rate is already coming down. He could probably run it again right now. Around them. The crowd was still buzzing. Jane could hear fragments of conversation as she walked Muffin to cool him down. Did you see how fast he was? That paint horse just had the fastest time of the day so far. I can't believe what I just watched. The final standings after cross-country were posted an hour later. Jane stood with Dr. Rogers, staring at the board. Advanced Division after cross-country first place. Muffin. Score 31.8. 0 penalties. Fastest time. Second place Aristocrat. Score 32.9. Third place Sovereign Gold. Score 35.1. First place. The paint horse from Montana was in first place at Newtown. Jane felt tears streaming down her face. Dr. Rogers put an arm around her shoulders. You did it, honey. You both did it. But the night was far from over. Jane was settling Muffin in his stall when Fiona appeared with 2 other officials. Their expressions were grim. Miss Smith, we need to speak with you. Jane's stomach dropped. About what? There have been concerns raised about your horse's performance today. Concerns. Several competitors have suggested that his performance was unusually enhanced. There are questions about whether he might have been given prohibited substances. Jane felt like she'd been slapped. You're accusing me of drugging my horse. We're not accusing anyone of anything, one of the other officials said quickly. But given the unusual nature of his performance, we feel it's necessary to conduct additional testing for the integrity of the competition. He's a paint horse doing what paint horses were bred to do. Work hard, go fast, never quit. His performance wasn't unusual. It was just him being himself. Nevertheless, Fiona said, we'll need to conduct blood work and additional testing tonight. If you refuse, you'll be automatically disqualified. Jane wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them exactly what she thought of their concerns. But refusing would mean disqualification, and she hadn't come this far to give up. Now fine, test him. You won't find anything. The vet who came to draw blood was apologetic. I'm sorry about this. For what it's worth, I watched your round today. That horse is just naturally talented. Tell that to them, Jane said bitterly. She spent a sleepless night in her trailer, parked next to Muffin's stall. Every sound made her jump. She kept imagining someone tampering with the samples, planting evidence, doing anything to disqualify the paint horse who was making them all look bad. The results came back at 6 a.m. the next morning. Dr. Rogers delivered them personally. Clean, she said. Not even a trace of anything prohibited. Your horse is exactly what he appears to be. Naturally talented. Jane sagged with relief. But you should know, Dr. Rogers continued. The complaints to the officials haven't stopped. There are riders threatening to withdraw if Muffin is allowed to continue. They're claiming his presence damages the integrity of the sport, because he's beating them while looking like he does. Dr. Rogers corrected, they can't stand it. The final phase of the 3-day event was show jumping. This would be held in the main arena in front of the largest crowd. Horses jumped in reverse order of standings, which meant Muffin would go last, which meant everyone would be watching. Jane walked the show jumping course at dawn. 13 fences, all set at maximum advanced height of 4.3 in. The course was technical, with tight turns and combinations designed to test a tired horse's remaining energy and focus. Muffin had never been a naturally scopy jumper. He didn't have the leg length or the jumping style of a thoroughbred, but what he had was heart and precision. He might not look pretty over the fences, but he got the job done. As the morning progressed and other horses completed their rounds, Jane watched the rails fall. The course was proving difficult. Only about 60% of horses were going clear. Each rail down added 4 faults to a score. The top 5 horses were separated by less than 8 points. Muffin could afford 8 faults and still win. But Jane didn't want 8 faults. She wanted to prove that this pasture ornament could jump clean at the highest level. The crowd was enormous. Easily 3,000 people packed the stands and lined the arena rail. Jane could see news cameras, social media influencers with their phones out. Everyone wanted to see what would happen with the paint horse. As Jane mounted Muffin in the warm-up area, she was approached by the rider currently in second place, a professional named Christopher Wells, riding a gorgeous Dutch warm blood named Aristocrat. "Miss Smith," he said, and his tone was surprisingly respectful. "I wanted to say something before you go in. If this is about withdrawing, number nothing like that." He smiled slightly. "I wanted to say that what you and your horse have accomplished this weekend is remarkable. Regardless of what happens in there, you've earned your place here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Jane felt tears prickling her eyes. "Thank you." Also, he added with a genuine grin, "If you beat me, at least I can say I was beaten by the most famous paint horse inventing." The starter called Jane's number. It was time. She rode Muffin into the arena. The crowd noise was deafening, a mix of cheers, skepticism, and curiosity. Muffin's ears swiveled, taking it all in, but he stayed focused. He'd been to enough shows now, the crowds didn't bother him. The start bell rang. Jane pointed Muffin at the first fence, a large oxer with a ground line. He locked onto it and jumped, clearing it with inches to spare. His front legs tucked tight, his back rounded. It wasn't pretty, but it was effective. Fence 2, a vertical with a Liverpool underneath. Clear. Fence 3, a triple combination. Muffin bounced through it like he was playing, his stride adjusting perfectly for each element. Clear. The crowd was getting louder. Jane blocked them out, focusing only on the course, only on Muffin's rhythm. Fence 7 was a massive oxer coming off a tight turn. It was the fence that had caught several horses earlier. They'd come around the turn unbalanced, and either crashed through it or refused. Jane sat deep, steadied Muffin, and asked for the jump. He exploded over it, his unusual jumping style making it look effortless. 3 fences left. Fence 11, a narrow vertical. Muffin threaded through it perfectly. Fence 12, another combination. His stride was shortening now. He was tired from yesterday's cross-country from 3 days of competition. But he didn't quit. He popped over both elements. Clear. 1 fence left. The final fence was a massive oxer, the widest on the course. It was designed to catch tired horses to find the ones who didn't have enough left in the tank. Jane felt Muffin gather himself beneath her. She could feel his determination, his heart. his absolute refusal to quit. They came around the final turn. She found their distance, and she asked. Muffin jumped. For a moment, they seemed suspended in the air. The horse who caused $1,200. The horse who'd been mocked and dismissed and photographed for ridicule. Sailing over a fence that would challenge horses worth 100 times more. His back hooves cleared the rail by an inch. They landed clean. The crowd absolutely erupted. Jane rode through the finished flags, and Muffin immediately broke into a trot. His head high, his ears forward. He knew. Somehow he always knew when he'd done something special. Dr. Rogers was there. Tears streaming down her face. Clear. Round. Jane, you went clear. Around them. The noise was overwhelming. People were standing, cheering, some of them crying. Jane dismounted, and Muffin immediately nuzzled her shoulder looking for treats. You did it, buddy, she whispered into his mane. You showed them all. The final results were posted 15 minutes later. First place, Muffin Jane Smith, 31.8 points. Second place, Aristocrat, Christopher Wells, 32.9 points. Third place, Sovereign Gold, Amanda Brighton, 35.1 points. The $1,200 paint horse had won Newtown. The award ceremony was surreal. Jane led Muffin into the arena for the victory gala, still hardly believing it was real. The crowd's applause was thunderous. She could see people in the stands holding up signs, "Go Muffin," and heart over breathing. As she stood on the top podium with her ribbon and trophy, Jane looked out at the crowd. She saw Dr. Rogers beaming with pride. She saw Christopher Wells applauding genuinely. She saw the young woman who'd taken Muffin's photo that first day now looking shocked and uncomfortable, and she saw Fiona standing at the back, her face unreadable. The media attention was immediate and overwhelming. By that evening, Muffin's story had gone viral. Paint Horse Wins' prestigious 3-day event was trending on social media. News outlets were calling. Magazines wanted interviews, but not everyone was celebrating. That evening, Jane received an email from the United States Eventing Association. They wanted to discuss concerns about Muffin's eligibility for future competitions. There were suggestions that the advanced division should have minimum height requirements. Proposals that horses should meet certain breed standards. Jane was reading through the email for the third time when there was a knock on her trailer door. She opened it to find Christopher Wells. "Mind if I come in?" They sat in her tiny trailer drinking cheap coffee from paper cups. "You've rattled some cages," Christopher said. "I noticed. The old guard doesn't like change. They don't like being shown that their expensive horses and fancy training programs aren't the only path to success." He smiled. "But you know what? Screw them. What you did this weekend was important. You proved that heart and hard work can beat money and breeding. They're trying to change the rules, make it so horses like Muffin can't compete. They can try, but the public loves your story. The sponsors love your story. You've brought more attention to eventing this weekend than we've had in years. The United States Eventing Association would be idiots to push you out." He was right. Over the next few weeks, the response to Muffin's win was overwhelmingly positive. Sponsors started calling not fancy equestrian brands, but mainstream companies who loved the Underdog story. Muffin the Paint Horse became a household name. But the best moment came 2 months later. Jane received a letter handwritten on expensive stationery. "Dear Miss Smith, I owe you an apology. When you came to Newtown with Muffin, I judged you both unfairly. I saw what your horse looked like, and assumed that was all he was. I was wrong. I've spent my entire career inventing, and I've become jaded. I forgot that this sport is supposed to be about partnership, courage, and determination, not just money and breeding. Watching Muffin compete reminded me why I fell in love with horses in the first place. His heart, his try, his absolute refusal to quit. That's what eventing should be about." I hope you'll accept my apology, and I hope you'll continue competing. The sport needs more horses like Muffin, and more riders like you." With respect and admiration, Fiona Kent Jane read the letter twice, then tucked it into her pocket. She walked out to the small paddock where Muffin was grazing, looking exactly like what he was, a stocky paint horse with irregular patches and a calm disposition. "You changed some minds, buddy," she said, scratching his favorite spot behind his ears, including mine. Because the truth was, Jane had doubted herself at times, had wondered if she was being stubborn or stupid, bringing a paint horse to compete at the highest levels, had questioned whether she was doing right by Muffin, putting him in situations where he'd be mocked and dismissed. But Muffin had never doubted. He'd shown up every day, ready to work, ready to try, ready to prove that heart mattered more than looks. 1 year after Newtown, Jane and Muffin stood at the start box of the prestigious Rolex Kentucky 3-day event, now called the Defender Kentucky 3-day event, one of only 6 annual, concourse complete international 5-star events in the world. The absolute pinnacle of eventing. They'd qualified by winning 3 more advanced events and placing in the top 3 at 2 others. Muffin was now a recognized name in eventing circles. But more importantly, he'd opened doors for other horses. Since Newtown, Jane had noticed a shift. More unusual horses were appearing at events. Quarter horses, Morgans, even Mustangs. Riders were willing to look beyond traditional breeding and give talented horses a chance regardless of what they looked like. The United States Eventing Association had quietly dropped their proposed rule changes about breed standards and height requirements. The backlash from the public had been too strong. Now, as Jane waited for the starter countdown at Kentucky, she felt surprisingly calm. Muffin was calm, too, his ears forward, ready for another adventure. "Nervous?" Dr. Rogers asked. She'd traveled to Kentucky specifically to watch them compete. "No," Jane said honestly. "We've already proven everything we needed to prove. Now we're just here to have fun." And they did. Muffin finished Kentucky in 8th place out of 75 of the world's best horses. Not a win, but a solid, respectable finish that proved Newtown wasn't a fluke. But the best moment came after the final showed jumping round. A young girl, maybe 12 years old, approached Jane at the barn. She was leading a fuzzy pony that looked like a mix of about 6 different breeds. "Miss Smith," the girl said shyly, "I wanted to say thank you. I was going to quit eventing because everyone said my pony wasn't good enough. But then I saw Muffin's story and I decided to keep trying. We just qualified for our first training level event." Jane knelt down to the girl's level. "What's your pony's name?" "Butterscotch." "That's a great name." "You know what I think, Butterscotch?" She addressed the pony who'd been nosing at her pockets. "I think you're going to surprise a lot of people." The girl beamed as she walked away. Dr. Rogers smiled. "You started something, you know, a whole generation of riders who believe they don't need a fancy horse to chase their dreams." Muffin started it. Jane corrected. "I just got out of his way and let him show everyone what he could do." That evening, sitting outside her trailer, as the sun set over the Kentucky Horse Park, Jane reflected on everything that had changed in a year. The sponsorships, the media attention, the opportunities that had come their way. But the best thing, the thing she was most proud of, was the shift in thinking she'd seen. More and more people were willing to look past appearances and breeding, and see a horse's true potential. Because in the end, that's what Muffin's story was about. Not about a paint horse beating warm bloods. Not about a low-budget rider competing against professionals. It was about looking deeper, seeing potential where others saw limitations, believing in heart over pedigree. Muffin wandered over from his hayet and rested his chin on Jane's shoulder, his favorite way of asking for scratches. "You know you're famous now, right?" Jane said, obliging with scratches behind his ears. You've got fan mail, sponsors. People dress up as you for Halloween. Muffin sighed contentedly, clearly not caring about any of that. But you know what makes you special? It's not the wins or the scores or the fancy ribbons. It's that you showed up every single day and tried your heart out. You never quit. You never doubted yourself. You just were yourself, and that was enough. That was more than enough. The horse dozed off, his head heavy on her shoulder, content in the way only a tired, happy horse could be. And Jane realized that this right here, right now, was what she'd been chasing all along. Not the wins or the recognition, but the simple truth that she and this remarkable horse had found each other, trusted each other, and proven that sometimes the most extraordinary things come in the most ordinary packages. Muffin competed successfully for 3 more years before retiring sound at age 13. He'd won 7 major events, placed in the top 10 at 2 5-star competitions, and earned over $150,000 in prize money. Not bad for a $1,200 paint horse. But his real legacy wasn't measured in ribbons or prize money. In the years following his Newtown win, registrations for non-traditional breeds at eventing competitions increased by 40%. Several major events eliminated discriminatory language about horse type from their entry requirements. And most importantly, hundreds of riders found the courage to compete on horses they loved, regardless of whether those horses fit the traditional mold. Jane went on to train other unlikely event horses, always looking for the ones that others overlooked. She never forgot what it felt like to be dismissed, to have her horse judged as worthless based on his appearance. As for Muffin, he spent his retirement exactly where he'd always been happiest, with Jane. He still greeted every morning with a cheerful nicker, still looked for treats in every pocket, still maintained that calm, unflappable disposition that had carried him through the biggest competitions in the world. Because in the end, Muffin had never needed to prove anything. He'd always known exactly who he was. A good horse with a big heart. Sometimes the world just needs a little time to recognize true greatness. Did this story inspire you? Have you ever been underestimated? Or seen someone rise above the doubt and prove everyone wrong? I'd love to hear about it, so share your experience in the comments below. And be sure to tell me which country you're watching from, so we can see how far the Stories for Horseback family reaches around the globe. If Jane and Muffin's journey meant something to you, please subscribe to Stories for Horseback and turn on notifications so you never miss our weekly stories celebrating courage, resilience, and the powerful bond between horses and humans. Thank you for being part of this growing community, where we believe greatness comes in every shape, size, and coat pattern. Until next time, remember, never judge a horse by its cover.